In the name of Christ who calls us. Amen. Mountaintops are dangerous places. My oldest brother John is a mountain climber, and a few years ago he went to climb a mountain called Aconcagua in South America, a very high mountain. And on the climb, there was a group of Japanese climbers who fell into a crevasse, and several of them died. And before they came to the summit, John began to experience altitude sickness. And so on the very last day of the climb, he was unable to summit the mountain and had to stay behind at camp. And when the other climbers returned from their summit, they found him 100 yards away from his tent, collapsed, passed out in the snow, not more than 10 feet from a crevasse. So John very nearly lost his life on that expedition. But he came home safely, having made friends with another climber whose name was Joe, and ironically is a guy who lived in Kelso. And they became close friends and climbing buddies until a couple years ago when Joe was standing on a cornice near the edge of the crater in Mount St. Helens and went down and died. It was a terrible accident. Mountaintops are dangerous places. And I suppose that archetype of the mountaintop, which refers to the spiritual high places, is for a reason. The story of Moses, we've got the fire and the cloud on the mountain. It sounds kind of like Mount St. Helens. Perhaps the danger spiritually has more to do with pride than many things. There's nothing worse than a convert. Somebody who's very recently discovered something important and can't shut up about it and is suddenly the expert on everything and wants you to know how you need to share the same joy that they're experiencing. That kind of spiritual pride is very dangerous, I think, for people. And it makes me appreciate why God chose a stammerer to be the deliverer of the law. If you remember Moses' story, he's encountering God on the holy mountain and saying, I can't do this job. Please don't ask me to do this job. I can't talk. Kind of like the king's speech. And it makes sense to me that people like Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa are all people with this incredible, gentle humility and kind of twinkle in their eyes, you know. Those are the kind of people that can endure a mountaintop experience and not be ruined by it. There's another reason I think that few of us have these intense mountaintop experiences besides the danger of it. I think there's also a danger that we won't get it. And even more so that we don't really want it. You know, everybody thinks that if they had a sign, they'd believe. But the reality is, if we had a sign and we believed, then there'd be expectations of us, wouldn't there? And I'm not sure that we want the expectations that go along with that. Joel Rupley was telling me the other day about a woman who was looking for a job in Portland. And she's driving around the block trying to find a parking space for this job interview. It's very important. She can't find a parking space. So she says to God, all right, I'll go to church on Sunday if you provide a parking space for me. Second time around the block, she says, okay, God, I'll go to church 4 Sundays in a row if you find a parking space for me, because I really need this job and I really need to not be late. Third time around the block. Okay, God, okay. I will go to church and I will tithe. And of course, the moment she says that, a parking space miraculously opens up. And she whips into it and says, oh, don't worry about it, God, I found one. behind. Joel has such good friends. So we don't get those signs too often. Because those sort of foxhole conversions don't usually amount to much, do they? When we're really ready, we get what we need, though. And one of the things we all get is baptism. Everybody gets baptism. Now, of course, most of us are too little to remember our baptism. Most of us, at least in the Episcopal tradition, are baptized as babies or young children, and so we don't remember our baptism. But everybody else gets our baptism. We don't do it privately anymore. We do it in the congregation because it is a miraculous moment. We look on these beautiful children and we see them in their precious white garments, and we see them as God's beloved children. I mean, we can't miss it, can we? I mean, even when they're screaming their heads off, we see them and our hearts are filled with love and joy and celebration. And we know this is a child of God. But of course, all of us are children of God. We were all at least that precious to our families and loved ones when they looked on us when we were tiny. And guess what? You're still that same person. You may be bigger and more wrinkled, but you are that same person. We are all beloved children of God, and when we have a baptism, that sign is so vivid for us. And we're like the disciples at a baptism, looking on at the radiant one on the holy mountain, she who will be the living representation of the risen Christ for us in just a few moments. She will reveal for us a reality that we usually ignore, that we too are children of God, we too are the resurrected Christ in the world. And like the disciples, we're given this moment not just as a feel-good thing, not just so we can rejoice with a beautiful child, though that's great. That in and of itself would probably be enough. But the bonus is this. The voice from the cloud is still speaking to us too. Not only saying, "This is my beloved child," but also saying, "And by the way, I'd like you to listen." We not only enjoy the baptism of this child, we renew our own baptismal vows. We remember that we are that chosen child of God, but that we are also that called one. That one who is to live out the baptismal life, to live out the baptismal promises that we make this morning and we renew this morning. And we're given the joy of the mountaintop, the happiness of seeing this beautiful girl baptized, to give us strength, to remind us in the tough times, because the tough times inevitably come. In the story we have today, it's the next thing that happens. Jesus comes down that mountain and he heads for Jerusalem. This is the last day of Epiphany, the last day of the revelation of Christ. Next Sunday, we make the journey to the cross in the season of Lent. So today we celebrate Addison. But as we do so, we remind ourselves of who we are as beloved children, called to live out our baptismal vows in the world. Amen. So the candidate for baptism will now be presented. She's done with her snack.